welcome to this amazing event. Hi, this is lovely. You have come, as I think you all know, to participate either by reading and or by listening in the Frederick Douglass 4th of July speech. What is the, what to the not hearing me? What to the American slave is your 4th of July? You're not hearing me back there? I think I can turn the volume. Oh, I know why. That was staged, of course. Can you hear me now? Okay, yay, thanks. So I'm really glad you're here, each and every one of you, and we're glad. Rigby, who's moving around finding things out, and I had this idea, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it's just so beautiful to see the fruition of an idea. But first to say this. Let's all take a moment to really be here, okay? This is an event. It is, I Clifton, it's an important event, and I just want us to take a moment to just settle back and, in a sense, have a moment of silent-ish reflection. So just take the opportunity to notice that you're here, feeling the contact of the chair, the body sitting in the chair, the feet touching the earth, the ground. We so often forget about the ground, the earth that we walk on. And this earth was, once upon a time, not too long ago, under the stewardship of the Abenaki native people. And then came the colonists, and then there was a history here. There was a long history here. There was the Civil War, not fought here, but Lebanon people went for the sake of freeing the slaves. And so just take a moment to be here on this day in 2019 and feel it now. We who have become the stewards of the land and the ideas of the nation, just pause to feel the air touching the skin. To hear the sounds of summer. And to just pause to consider, here it is, this public reading, part of the celebration of the 4th of July. What interests you about it? And if someone were to ask you, what's your intention for being here today? And so coming back to the body, felt sense of the ground, and just if you've closed your eyes, you could open them or just look around and take a moment to look around and see your fellow citizens, your fellow stewards of the culture here in this United States of America. So I want to say about this reading of the 4th of July speech. It was given, the speech was originally given in 1852, and as Bob pointed out to me, Frederick Douglass probably looked like this around then. So there he is. It was given in 1852. He had been escaped from slavery in 38, so he'd been free for, 13 years. Not really free. What had just happened was the Fugitive Slave Act had passed, which entrenched slavery even more than it was entrenched. It made every citizen of this nation responsible for returning runaway slaves to the South. Not only were they responsible, they were paid for doing it. So the nation became more than complicit, it became active slavers, basically. And Frederick, fortunately, even though he was a fugitive slave, he was no longer, because he was bought. He allowed himself to be bought by a family in Ireland. And there were a lot of people against that. It had happened years before, but it meant that he was basically safe and he actually helped other people get to Canada. So it was a really turbulent time when he gave the speech. He was asked by the Ladies Abolitionist Society of Rochester, New Hampshire, to give a talk on the 4th of July. And he gave this talk, and he gave it on the 5th of July, which is the day that the slaves were allowed to celebrate the 4th of July, the day that all black people were allowed. They weren't allowed to do it on the 4th. If they tried to, they were disrupted. So he gave the speech in 1852. And then in the early 2000s, maybe 2007, 2008, there was a public reading of the speech in Boston. One man had the idea to do it, and it became so, it was so well received that Boston began to do it every year. And then it was picked up throughout Massachusetts, and the Massachusetts Council on the Humanities made it part of their program. It moved then into Vermont through the Council on Humanities, and there are 25 towns this year. And so Carol Rugby and I both live in Lebanon. She lives in West Lebanon, and I live in Lebanon. And we had this idea, couldn't we bring this speech to Lebanon? And we have. It's kind of wonderful. So, yay. So as we began to talk about it, we're both members of Valley Insight Meditation Society, which is a Buddhist practice group in the area. And we're both members of SURGE, Show Up for Racial Justice. And Carol's a founding member of that group, and a mover and a shaker and a leader in that group. So we went to those two groups, and they definitely wanted to support it too. And so they became the co-sponsors, and we very soon invited the third co-sponsor, United Valley Interfaith Project, and got such support. Valley Insight is a member, and it's a group of faith communities that's very concerned with social justice, racial justice, immigrant justice, and Esma El-Huni is hopefully here, is reading today, and really so helpful in recruiting people and getting the word out. And also Rod Wendt, who isn't here today because he's away, so helpful. So then we decided to approach the city, and I have known Clifton Below for a long time, so I said, well, we'll send an email to Clifton. he'll help. And so we did, and Clifton put us in touch with Paul Coates, who couldn't be here today. He's working. And Paul, opened every door and made possible the fact that we have water and chairs and podium and speaker and a place on a docket. We actually had a place on the 4th of July. But what happened was Carol in outreach found out that she outreached to the Black Heritage Trail Association of New Hampshire and found that they were already organizing something in the state, and they wanted all the readings to happen at the same time. So a lot of people have asked, why today, why this time? And why today, why this time is because in 10 other towns in the state, this is happening right now too. And in the 11th town, it's Claremont, and they're doing it tonight on their green. And I just felt so proud of Claremont about all the racial issues that have happened there recently. So Claremont tonight, if you want to go to another reading. So Paul helped us with the city. It turned out we needed city permits. Tina Stearns in the city manager's office was really helpful to us. I don't know how to fill out those things, it's like, no, I can't. Could we waive it? No, but I'll help you. And a woman named Haley in the police department so that we could use sound. And the city manager himself is here too, Sean Mulholland, which is wonderful. And and reading. So the whole thing seems just to have grown in such beautiful ways. And I want to thank everybody, to thank the, we reached out to the Lebanon Historic Society through Lee Hammond. There's just so much support, and it feels so wonderful given what's happening in our country now. As you listen to the speech, listen for that. Listen for how it's relevant. It's historic. It's also really relevant. So keeping that in mind. I also want to thank the First Congregational Church. If it were raining, we'd be over there. They offered that space. And CATV is here, happily. All the volunteers for setup, Bob Rugby for taking photographs, for helping out. So there's just so much. Also, I want to, at the volunteer table was another member of our planning committee, Jim Bell. So it's great that everybody's here. And I neglected to mention a really important part of it, which are the city libraries. We reached out to them early on, to Sean Fleming and Amy Lappin, and they were just, again, so opening. And Amy got together a display of literature, which is up now, really nice. And so it's right in the library over there if you want to go, books and such. And I think that is, if I've forgotten anyone, I am really sorry that I have done that. So the logistics are, people have signed up, so you have a paragraph. Many people have paragraphs. And what we're going to do is read from up here. And so Carol will start. Carol's going to read the first paragraph. And then others could be forming a line, a queue over here, so that, so in other words, when number 1 is being read, paragraph 1, 2 should definitely be up here and 3 should be on their way. And we'll keep a pretty even flow. It seems to work okay. We have not filled all the slots, I don't think. We have? They're all filled. Wow. We have filled 54 slots, people. That's great. Yay. The other thing I want to say that I know Steve Glazer, who's a teacher at Crossroads School, English teacher, works on this speech with his kids every year, and he's here, and 2 of the students are here, and they're going to read what they have memorized. So that's really wonderful. Carol is saying... There's brochures on the registration table, and something else. Do you want to come up and say, I can't hear what you're saying? Oh, I know. There's a few more chairs to move up. I know the other thing is, I don't know if that's what Carol was saying, but we talked about a discussion. If anybody wants to stay for further discussion, we'll end at the end, but if you want to stay, you could just move up and we could have a kind of informal discussion about it. The other thing, I didn't do any of the logistics. There's water over there. Silence your cell phones. At the end, there's a poem that we'll do in unison. So I'm going to be the last reader, and then paragraph 54, and then we'll read the poem that is actually by William Lloyd Garrison, which is how Frederick ended the speech. He was an early mentor. And there's a donation box, I think, if you'd like to contribute to the cost, which is not, it's minimal, really, printing, and anything left over from that would go to the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. And there's a sign-up sheet there. If you want to sign up on that for hearing about future events like this, that would be fine, or not. We do hope to do it next year. But we haven't done it yet this year, so I will step away and give the podium to Carol. All right, thank you all.
Mr. President, friends, and fellow citizens, the task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. I do not remember ever to have appeared as a speaker before any assembly more shrinkingly, nor with greater distrust of my ability, than I do this day. The papers and placards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is, to me, a matter of astonishment as well as of gratitude.
This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This, to you, is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. You are, even now, only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in the period of childhood. I repeat, I am glad this is so. There is hope in the thought, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon.
Fellow citizens, 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people, in which you now glory, was not then born. You were under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government, England as the fatherland, although a considerable distance from your home, impose in the exercise of its parental prerogatives upon its colonial children such restraints, burdens, and limitations as in its mature judgment it deemed wise, right, and proper.
But your fathers, who had not adopted the idea of the infallibility of government and the absolute character of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of some of those burdens and restraints. They went so far as to pronounce the measures of government unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as ought not to be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers. Feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government, your fathers, like men of honesty and men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned and remonstrated, and did so in a decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn, yet they persevered.
Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there is always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of a total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we, at this distance of time, regard it. The timid and the prudent of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Their opposition to the then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful. But amid all their terror and affrighted vociferations against it, the alarming and revolutionary idea moved on, and the country with it.
On the second day of July 1776, the old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshippers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. We seldom hit upon resolutions drawn up in our day whose transparency is at all equal to it. Resolved that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown.
Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you therefore may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ringbolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny.
Pride and patriotism, not less than gratitude, prompt you to celebrate and to hold it in perpetual remembrance. I have said that the Declaration of Independence is the ringbolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So indeed I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles. Be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, and at whatever cost.
Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were brave men. I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory.
They loved their country better than their own private interests, and all will concede that it is a rare virtue that ought to command respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for his country is a man for whom it is not in human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor on the cause of their country. In their admiration of liberty, they lost sight of all other interests.
They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitation against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times.
How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength into the distant future. Mark them, fully appreciating the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them. Your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure which has risen and still rises in grandeur around you.
Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary. Our eyes are met with demonstrations of joyous enthusiasm. The causes which led to the separation of the colonies from the British Crown have never lacked for a tongue. They have all been taught in your common schools, narrated at your firesides, unfolded from your pulpits, and thundered from your legislative halls, and are as familiar to you as household words. They form the staple of your national poetry and eloquence. I leave, therefore, the great deeds of your fathers to others.
My business, if I have been here today, is with the present, the accepted time with God and his cause is ever living now. We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. Now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, have done their work, and have done much of it well. You live, and you must die, and you must do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's share in the labor of your fathers unless your children are to be blessed by your labors. You have no right to wear out and waste hardened fame of your fathers to cover your indolence.
Fellow citizens, pardon me, allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar, and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light, and my burden easy and delightful. For who is there so cold that a nation's sympathy could not warm him? Who so obdurate and dead to the claims of gratitude that would not thankfully acknowledge such priceless benefits? Who so stolid and selfish that would not give his voice to swell the hallelujahs of a nation's jubilee when the chains of servitude had been torn from his limbs? I am not that man. In a case like that, the dumb might eloquently speak, and the lame man leap as in heart. But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you, this day, rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The great principles of political freedom, justice, and prosperity bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that has brought light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? If so, there's a parallel to your conduct. And let me warn you that it is dangerous to copy the example of a nation whose crimes, towering up to heaven, were thrown down by the breath of the Almighty, bearing that nation in irrevocable ruin I can today take up the plaintive lament of a peeled and woe-smitten people.
My subject, then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day from a slave's point of view, standing here, identified with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine. I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul and the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future.
Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, in the name of liberty, which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call in question and to denounce, with all the emphasis that I can command, everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command, and yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice, or who is not at heart a slaveholder, shall not confess to be right and just.
I fancy I hear someone of my audience say, it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit where all is plain and there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? On what branch of the subject do the people of this country need light?
Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of the laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia, which, if committed by a black man, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to the like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being?
Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read or write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then I will argue with you that the slave is a man.
Is it not astonishing that while we're plowing, planting and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave. We are called upon to prove that we are men.
Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongness of slavery? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation, as a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to understand? How should I look today in the presence of Americans to show that men have a natural right to freedom? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him and for women.
What? Am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their family, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employment for my time and strength than such arguments would imply. What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine? That God did not establish it? That our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There's blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? They that can may. I cannot. The time for such argument is past.
At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed. Oh, had I the ability and could I reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced.
What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings,
with all your religious parade and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy, a thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages.
There is not a nation on the earth guilty of such practices, more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchs and despotisms of the old world. Search out every abuse, and when you have found it at last, lay the facts beside the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for the revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without rival.
Take the American slave trade, which we are told by the papers is especially prosperous just now, as the price of men was never higher, and which is carried on in all the large towns and cities in 1/2 of this Confederacy. This trade is one of the peculiarities of American institutions. In several states, this trade is a chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade, in order to divert it from the horror with which the foreign slave trade is contemplated.
The foreign slave trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy, as an execrable traffic. To arrest it, this nation needs a squadron at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as a most inhuman traffic, opposed alike to the laws of God and of man. It is, however, a notable fact that while so much execration is poured out by Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and their business is deemed as honorable.
Behold the practical operation of the internal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine to a market. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you a swine drover. They inhabit all of our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of the nation with droves of human stock. You will see one of these flesh jobbers armed with pistol, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children to the Potomac, to the slave market in New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit purchasers. They are food for the cotton field and the deadly sugar mill.
Mark the sad procession as it moves wearily along, and the inhuman wretch who drives them. Hear the savage yells and his blood-chilling oaths as he hurries on his affrighted captives. There see the old man who looks thin and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, upon that young mother, whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arms. See, too, that girl of 13 weeping,
yes, weeping as she thinks of the mother for whom she has been torn. The drove moves tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly you hear a quick snap, like the discharge of a rifle. The fetters clank and the chains rattle simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed has faltered under the weight of her child, and her chains that gash her shoulders tells her to move on.
Follow this drove to New Orleans. Attend the auction. See the men examined like horses. See the forms of women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking glaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever. And never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from that scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where under the sun you can witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking. Yet this is but a glance at the American slave trade as it exists at this moment in the ruling part of the United States.
I was born amid such sights and scenes. To me, the American slave trade is a terrible, is a terrible reality. The fleshmongers gather up their victims by dozens and drive them chained to the General Depot at Baltimore. When a sufficient number has been collected here, a ship is chartered for the purpose of conveying the forlorn crew to Mobile or to New Orleans. From the slave prison to the ship, they are usually driven in the darkness of night. In the deep, still darkness of midnight, I have often been aroused by the dead, heavy footsteps and the piteous cries of the chained gangs that passed our door.
Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is, today, in active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised on the highways of the South. I see the bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wail of fettered humanity on the way to the slave markets, where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep, and swine, knocked off to the highest bidder. There I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken to gratify the lust, caprice, and rapacity of the buyers and sellers of men. My soul sickens at the sight.
But a still more inhuman, disgraceful, and scandalous state of things remains to be presented. By an act of American Congress, not yet 2 years old, slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. Mason and Dixon's line has been obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere state institution, but is now an institution of the whole United States.
The power is coextensive with the Star-Spangled Banner and American Christianity. Where these go may also go the merciless slave hunter. Where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird for the sportsman's gun. By the most foul and fiendish of all human decrees, the liberty and person of every man are put in peril. Your broad Republican domain is hunting ground for men.
Your lawmaker
Your lawmakers have commanded all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your Secretary of State enforce as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country and to your God that you do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have, within the past 2 years, been hunted down and without a moment's warning hurried away in chains and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Some of these have had wives and children dependent on them for bread, but of this no account was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage and to all rights in this republic, the rights of God included.
For a black man there is neither law nor justice, humanity nor religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes to the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery, and 5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any 2 villains is sufficient under this hell-black enactment to send the most pious and exemplary black man into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He can bring no witnesses for himself. The Minister of American Justice is bound by the law to hear but one side, and that side is the side of the oppressor.
Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyrant-killing, king-hating, people-loving, democratic, Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe and are bound in deciding in the case of a man's liberty to hear only his accusers.
In glaring violation of justice, in shameless disregard to the forms of administering law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation.
Americans, your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. You boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 million of your countrymen. You hurl your anathemas at the crown-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria, and China, and DPRK, and Saudi Arabia, and pride yourselves on your democratic institutions, while you yourselves consent to be the mere tools and bodyguards of the tyrants of Virginia and Carolina.
You invite to your shores fugitives of oppression from abroad. Honor them with your banquets, greet them with your ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But the fugitives from your own lands you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill. You glory in your refinement and your universal education, yet you maintain a system as barbarous and dreadful as ever stained the character of a nation, a system begun in avarice, supported in pride, and perpetuated in cruelty.
You shed tears over fallen Hungary and make the sad story of her wrongs the theme of your poets, statesmen, and orators, till your gallant sons are ready to fly to arms to vindicate her cause against the oppressor. But in regard to the 10,000 wrongs of the American slave, you would enforce the strictest silence and would hail him as an enemy of a nation who dares to make those wrongs the subject of public discourse. You are all on fire at the mention of the liberty for France or for Ireland, but as cold as an iceberg at the thought of liberty for the enslaved of America.
You discourse eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet you sustain a system which, in its very essence, casts a stigma upon labor. You can bare your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, and yet wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the black laborers of your country. You profess to believe that of one blood God made all nations of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and hath commanded all men everywhere to love one another. Yet you notoriously hate and glory in your hatred all men whose skins are not colored like your own.
You declare before the world, and are understood by the world to declare, that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet, you hold securely in a bondage which, according to your own Thomas Jefferson, is worse than ages of that which your fathers rose in rebellion to oppose. A 7th part of the inhabitants of your country.
Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country brands your republicanism as a sham, your humanity as a base pretense, and your Christianity as a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundations of religion and makes your name a hissing and a byword to a mocking earth. It is the antagonistic force in your government, the only thing that seriously disturbs and endangers your union. It fetters your progress. It is the enemy of hope and the deadly foe of education. It fosters pride. It breeds insolence. It promotes vice. It shelters crime. It is a curse to the earth that supports it. And yet you cling to it. You cling to it as if it were the sheet anchor of all of your hopes. Oh, be warned. Be warned. A horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom. The venomous creature is nursing at the tender heart of your republic. For the love of God, tear away and fling from you the hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 millions, the population of the United States, crush and destroy it. Racism, dehumanization, American slavery, forever.
But it is answered in reply to all of this that precisely what I have now denounced is in fact guaranteed and sanctioned by the Constitution of the United States, that the right to hold and to hunt slaves is part of a constitution framed by the illustrious fathers of the Republic. Then I dare to affirm, notwithstanding, that all I have said before, your fathers, instead of being the honest men that I have before declared them to be, were the veriest impostors that ever practiced on mankind. This is the inevitable conclusion, and from that there is no escape. But I differ from those who charge this baseness on the framers of the Constitution of the United States. It is slander upon their memory, at least, so I believe, and others have, as I think, fully and clearly vindicated the Constitution from any design to support slavery for an hour.
Allow me to say, in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery.
The arm of the Lord is not shortened, and the doom of slavery is certain. I therefore leave off where I began, with hope. While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is also cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do not now stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot round in the same old path of its fathers without interference. The time was when such could be done. Long-established customs of hurtful character could formerly fence themselves in and do their evil work with social impunity. Knowledge was then confined and enjoyed by the privileged few, and the multitude walked on in mental darkness. But a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. It makes its pathway over and under the sea, as well as on the earth. Wind, steam, and lightning are its chartered agents. Oceans no longer divide, but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. Space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are distinctly heard on the other.
The far-off and almost fabulous Pacific rolls in grandeur at our feet. The celestial empire, the mystery of ages, is being solved. The fiat of the Almighty, "Let there be light," has not yet spent its force. No abuse, no outrage, whether in taste, sport, or avarice, can now hide itself from the all-pervading light. The iron shoe and crippled foot of China must be seen in contrast with nature. Africa must rise and put on her yet unwoven garment. Ethiopia shall stretch out her hand unto God. In the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison, I say, and let every heart join in saying, reading together, God speed the year of Jubilee, the wide world over, when their galling chains set free, the oppressed shall vilely bend the knee, and wear the yoke of tyranny, like brutes no more. That year will come and freedom's reign, to man and women plundered rights again restore. God speed the day when human blood shall cease to flow, in every clime be understood the claims of human brotherhood, and each return for evil good, not blow for blow. And that day will come, all feuds to end, and change into a faithful friend, each foe. Yeah. I know, you were wonderful and filled every slot. That was really lovely. Thank you. And Carol has some parting words.
Thank you, Doreen. Let's just pause for... How's that? Good? Let's just pause for a moment and take in this experience. On behalf of our sponsors and the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire, I want to thank you, every one of you, for coming today and sharing in the first of what we hope will be an annual community reading. We had no idea how many people were going to show up, and I am overwhelmed with this turnout. I want to thank our volunteers who helped with every task from planning to set up to take down. Volunteers who are here, please wave so we can recognize you with our appreciation. Some of you are not here because you're working or whatever. Thank you, volunteers. And thank you again to all of our co-sponsors and to the City of Lebanon. Finally, if any of you would like to stay around for discussion, you can get up and stretch and come back here in about 5 minutes or so to the chairs, and we can gather and have a discussion for those of you who'd like to. Thank you all, and I hope to see you here next year. You can recycle. There's a basket over there if you want to recycle.